So, Geoffrey, first of all, I'd like to thank you for joining me today and thank you for being our first victim on the Funderstanding video interviews. Obviously, pleased and thrilled to have you here. Geoffrey, you spent your whole career in education, right?
Actually,
Or actually, yeah, go ahead.
you want me to recount the story of my life?
Uh, the bulk of your career,
The bulk,
post-business, has been in
yeah.
education.
But, I began as a professor. I was a professor of law, got into business, and then went back to become an education consultant. And I've done that for a quarter of a century.
Now you're focused on something a little bit different, listening.
That's the idea. It turns out to be crucial to everything I've done.
Tell us a little bit about that. Why the transition? Why listening?
Um, One of the interesting things about any job, whether you're teaching students or whether you're working with a client or whether you're a consultant, is that people will say things and either we don't understand, they don't understand each other, or they change their mind, or it turns out that there is something deeper going on. And if you're really trying to get into the heart of a student or the heart of a client or just solve a problem, it's a pretty good idea to be able to get to the essence of what it's all about. And in my experience, listening has been the key.
So, just to make sure that I'm understanding here, what you're saying, I think, is you at root cause to a lot of the problems that you observe was a problem in listening.
Well, let's see if I can go back. If I go back to when I was teaching law, I ran a course on the legislative process, and I was a traditional Orthodox teacher. I would tell, and the students would listen. And of course, it turns out they weren't listening. They were sitting back, they were nudging each other. And I finally got to the point where I got so totally bored with what was going on that on the spur of the moment I said, okay, why don't we improvise? Why don't we create a parliamentary committee rather than talk about what those guys do? Actually, this is in the context of the recent shutdown or near shutdown, it's interesting. And so on the spur of the moment, we began to develop a committee, and it turned out that we had some very strong ideological differences. They hadn't been at all apparent in the classroom. And it turned out that every student, because these were advanced age students, every one of those students had a career motive in mind, and they were not only there to get a job, they were there to network, and they were there to build relationships, and they were there to gain every bit of leverage they could. And they actually sometimes didn't like each other. And so just by watching them, it became quite apparent that there would be some who didn't pay attention to what others were saying, even when, had they paid attention, they would have learned more for their own benefit. And so what I found that just by having this messy, chaotic, non-silent classroom, when people were forced to actually work together, they began to pay more attention and to find out things and gain insights they had never had in any other way. And so for me, this is going back nearly 40 years. I revealed my age. But the bottom line is, if you want to get to reality, you've got to be able to listen, including the people with whom you disagree.
Okay, that's a terrific story. So what's interesting is you were a traditional stand-up and lecture teacher, but you had the awareness, I guess, to recognize at some point that maybe people weren't listening. That led you to begin to explore new approaches, and then through that, you were able to end up where you are now.
And it just opened up a whole range of possibilities in the world of teaching, and that impacted everything that I did afterwards. Yep.
Fabulous. So for people who are hearing this for the first time, what list? Give us a list. Give us a top three lists, or what are the three things that people? How can they improve listening? How can we bring this into our lives? How can we become better learners and teachers?
I would begin. I'll give you a list of two. The first one is a matter of attitude. People get so comfortable with their own opinions and so comfortable with their own points of view and so comfortable with the other people they listen to, who are their friends, that they tend not to be aware of the fact that sometimes the people with whom they disagree most may actually have something very, very, very valuable to contribute. And so the purpose behind listening is to get, one of the purposes is to gain more information. You've got to be open to the fact that that information will come from people you may not like or situations where you don't want to be. So it's got to be an attitude. Be aware of the fact that there is more there than, there's a bumper sticker that says, "Don't believe everything that you think." Well, I love that bumper sticker. And the second thing has to do with the way we use our body. We're in an overwhelming world, and we're all speeding up. There are a huge number of distractions. And because there are distractions, we tend to gloss along the surface. Well, if you're going to listen deeply, you've got to take time to relax, and you've got to be able to focus, and you've got to be able to breathe, and you've got to be able to actually look somebody in the eye or be there with them. And so there's actually a physical component to good listening. And because the world is so demanding right now, we actually have to practice that. So if I were looking to two foundational ways to begin to deal with listening, one would be attitude and the other would be a body.
That's
Improve
terrific.
both.
That's terrific. Thank you. That's great. I really appreciate you joining us today, Geoffrey, and look forward to having more talks with you.
Much appreciated, Derek.
Yes.